Chapter 1139. Within the illusory immortal city, a destitute independent cultivator's stall had a few tens of various metal carvings on it. There were all sorts of lifelike birds, beasts, people, and things, and their exquisiteness could indeed be considered as handicrafts. This seemingly destitute independent cultivator was none other than Nongju. These **T handicrafts were made by Yu Qianqiu at the last minute in order to fool him, and there were a few hundred of them. In Yu Qianqiu's words, "I'm not really asking you to set up a stall to sell things, and you just have to make something to deal with it. Your main task is to inquire about all sorts of information. If I really get some good things for you to sell, you won't have the time to inquire about information when your business is booming. The more you can't sell something, the better it is." Of course, Yu Qianqiu didn't ask Nongju to randomly pick up a few stones to make up the numbers, as he was afraid that Nongju would be beaten up by those who didn't like him. Instead, he made some sculptures that were at least passable. At the beginning, because of the influence of the news that the devil dimension was about to descend upon the three dimensions, the square did seem to be much more deserted. However, it was also because of the influence of that news that the flow of people suddenly increased in just a few days. Everyone came to purchase things that they could use or might use as reserves in preparation for the upcoming calamity. The entire illusory immortal city was unprecedentedly bustling, and it could even be described as overcrowded. Not to mention the various stalls on the square, even the mountains of the various sects were filled with endless streams of people. All of them were in a hurry, and the atmosphere was becoming more and more tense. There were people stopping to look at Nongju's stall from time to time. Most of them thought that there was something profound about these sculptures, so they asked with interest. Nongju was truly speechless, and he could only imitate Yu Qianqiu's words. "This is a work of art that I meticulously carved, and there's nothing profound about it." In the end, he received countless supercilious looks, and many people scolded him for thinking too much about money. He'd never been scolded by so many people in his entire life. At first, Nongju really couldn't take it, but as time passed, he got used to it. His attention was focused on the conversations of the people around him, and all sorts of information began to pour in. Speaking of which, the various sects had to thank Yu Qianqiu for using the teleportation function of the Golden Pearl to deliver the news in time. When the various sects received the news from their sects, they were all shocked. Almost all the forces that were close to the demonic world's passageway gathered there without any hesitation. They did their best to set up all sorts of restrictions at the sealed entrance to the demonic world to prevent the passageway from being opened. The most outrageous one was the one in the immortal world. Around the sealed passageway to the devil world, nearly 100 sects had arrived in time to set up countless formations of various sizes. As long as it was a formation that each sect knew, they would set it up regardless of the consequences. Even if it had been repeated countless times, as long as there was space nearby, they would set it up as much as they wanted. They kept setting up all kinds of restrictions. Nearly 100 sects set up formations in the sky and on the ground. It was a spectacular scene. As a result, within a radius of hundreds of miles, the heaven and earth were covered with gloomy clouds and fog. It was so dark that one couldn't even see his own fingers, let alone find the location of the entrance to the devil world. As expected, Jin Tai and Bai Qi came here. Because they were in the immortal world, the sealed entrance to the devil world was naturally the most convenient choice. Relying on their strong cultivation, the two of them directly killed their way here. As a result, when they arrived, they were also shocked by the situation in front of them. However, time waited for no man. Wang Qing must have heard the news and came here, so the two of them directly broke the formations. Rumble, rumble, rumble. None of the formations could stop them, and they were forcibly broken one after another. But no matter how powerful the two of them were, they couldn't resist the fact that there were too many formations. It took them nearly a day to break through more than 10,000 formations and forcibly advance 100 miles. The strength of the two of them could be imagined, but they still couldn't see the shadow of the sealed entrance to the devil world. The two of them were immediately dumbfounded. They finally understood what it meant to anger the public, and they finally understood the power of the masses. Jin Tai was so angry that he stomped his feet and cursed Yu Qianqiu. If it wasn't for Yu Qianqiu leaking the news, How could they encounter such an unprecedented good thing? At this time, Wang Qing also hurried over. A six-dragon snow blue sword forced the two of them to flee again. After they left, the hundreds of sects that scattered immediately saw that it was effective, so they immediately gathered again and began to set up the formations day and night. At the same time, they quickly sent a message to the other sections. As a result, the other sects naturally followed suit. Without saying anything, they directly piled up the passages to the 72 worlds with countless formations to prevent Jin Tai and Bai Qi from breaking into the human world to open the passage to the devil world. The netherworld, which was shocked by what happened in the immortal world, quickly followed suit and piled up the passages to the devil world and the 72 worlds with countless formations. After this matter, the immortal world and the netherworld finally believed in Yu Qianshou's warning. Wang Qing even directly announced to the whole world that Yu Qianshou had taken great credit. From today onwards, the grievances between the Heartless Palace and Yu Qianshou were written off. And the various forces that were scared to the point of cold sweat expressed their praises to Yu Qianshou without hesitation. However, Yu Qianshou himself did not expect that the various sects could come up with such a method. He had always thought that there were too many entrances to the devil world. With just the power of Wang Qing and his son, they could not take care of the east and west. So, he was still actively preparing for war. Nomju, who received this news, could not help but sigh. No matter what happened in the future, at least for now, it seemed that the boy really changed the fate of the three realms. Then, in view of Jin Tai and Bai Qi's unscrupulous means, under the call of the King of the Black Mountain in the Netherworld and the Heartless Palace in the Immortal World, all the forces were mobilized. They patrolled their respective territories day and night, searching for Jin Tai and Bai Qi's whereabouts. And for their own interests, everyone united unprecedentedly. At the first moment, they jointly formed the Immortal Underworld Demon Killing Alliance. The groups formed by the two realms deployed their forces as quickly as possible and divided their forces to guard the passages to the various realms. Once they found that the formations were destroyed, they immediately filled them up. Not long after, another piece of news came. Under the inescapable net formed by all the forces, they really found Jin Tai and Bai Qi's sneaky tracks in the immortal world. However, they had no way of catching the two. After the two killed many people, they easily escaped. Then, the two's tracks appeared again and again in various places, but there was nothing they could do. In the end, they were repeatedly destroyed and repaired at the same time. For a time, Jin Tai and Bai Qi were exhausted, and Wang Qing and Wu Feng, who chased the two everywhere to put out the fire, were also unbearably tired. However, in terms of cultivation and speed, they were not as good as the two's ability to escape. They really could not do anything to the two who specialized in destruction. The two sides were in a stalemate. So, someone suggested that the passage between the immortal world and the netherworld should also be stacked with a large formation to reduce the area where the two could escape. But Wang Qing and his son knew that it was useless. With the two's cultivation, no matter if they were trapped in the immortal world or the netherworld, if they wanted to escape, no one could do anything to them. In the end, because they did not do this, Jin Tai and Bai Qi finally found the opportunity. Chapter 1140. At the Cornucopia Commerce's headquarters, the god of wealth peak that still stood tall despite the damage was packed with people. The various feudal lords had gathered all their subordinates, the Green Gang and Hong Gang had gathered all the rogue cultivators from all over the world. Even China's cultivation world, which had the largest number of cultivators, had no choice but to comply. In a short time, over 1 million cultivators from all over the world had gathered here, an unprecedented grand occasion. Amidst the bustling crowd, everyone was looking around, curious and nervous at the same time. Most of them had no idea why they were here. Several hundred feudal lords and sect chiefs were having a meeting on the god of wealth peak. Considering that some feudal lords only had a few hundred or dozens of people under them, while others had tens of thousands of people under them, and some sects of different sizes were also in the same situation, the merger and reorganization began. Over 1 million cultivators were divided into 10 corps, with each corps having a little over 100,000 people. The several hundred feudal lords were divided into 9 groups, with a few people in each group as the core of each core. The remaining core consisted of over 100,000 rogue cultivators, all of which were added to the Hong Gang and Green Gang, under the command of Hong Chi and Gu Qingyun. The Huaxia cultivation world was broken up by sections. Sects of different sizes were distributed according to the number of people, and they were all under the core subordinates of the lords of the various countries. After the meeting was over, the commanders of the 10 newly formed corps swiftly gave the order to count the cultivation level of their subordinates. One had to admit that Yu Qianzhou used these people correctly. First of all, they knew their subordinates inside out, adding to their inherent prestige. Their work efficiency was extremely high. It took less than half a day to get a detailed result after counting over 1 million people. If Yu Qianzhou were to do it himself, it would be hard for him to even sort out the people. After receiving the detailed data, Yu Qianzhou immediately distributed 1 billion divine-grade spirit stones to each of the 10 corps, throwing out 10 billion divine-grade spirit stones in one go. A foundation establishment cultivator would need at most 1.4 billion high-grade spirit stones to advance to the immortal realm. Even if one were to start from the qi refining stage, it wouldn't exceed 1.5 billion high-grade spirit stones. If converted to divine-grade spirit stones, it would only be 15 pieces. Each of you will receive 15 pieces of divine-grade spirit stones. An army of 100,000 people will at most cost a little over 1 million divine-grade spirit stones. The rest of the spirit stones will be used as management expenses. When he and Zhang Peng experimented on their subordinates in Utopia, he already had first-hand data on the consumption of spirit stones. On top of that, Hong Chi and Gu Qingyun had invited cultivators from all over the world to refine countless medicinal pellets for them, so he was well prepared. After distributing the spirit stones, Huang Xiaolong quickly distributed a large number of foundation establishment pellets, 7 treasures pellets, great restriction breaking pellets, marrow cleansing pellets, and immortal ascension pellets according to the statistics. When such a large batch of medicinal pellets was distributed, even the various feudal lords who had come to the immortal world to broaden their horizons were shocked. How many so-called spiritual herbs and immortal herbs were needed to refine them? However, it was just a slight shock, and it didn't matter in the blink of an eye. In any case, everyone was used to seeing Yu Qianzhou's remarkable abilities, and it wasn't the first time they had seen something so inconceivable. The method to consume the medicinal pellets was not a problem for the feudal lords who were experienced. They quickly took the items they received and went to make arrangements. Half a day later, the crowd at the foot of the God of Fortune Peak sat down cross-legged. In an instant, the fragrance of various medicinal pellets filled the air, but the millions of people present were so quiet that one could hear a pin drop. In the following days, the sky above the God of Fortune Peak was covered with dark clouds. It was as if thousands of thunderbolts were connected to the God of Fortune Peak. There was an endless stream of experts who had forcibly raised their cultivation to the immortal realm flying up to the God of Fortune Peak to forge their immortal bodies. There was also an endless stream of people who were overjoyed and successful flying down to the God of Fortune Peak, willing to wait for arrangements. A month later, the entire cornucopia was empty. The millions of people had all disappeared, and everything that could be taken away from the World Commerce Chamber had been taken away. The wild beasts and birds in the mountains gradually became bolder and began to appear in this area. The empty houses became their safe nests to shelter from the wind and rain. The spiders also began to weave their webs on the doors and windows without worry. No one knew when the owner of this place would return. It was not only the cornucopia. In places that were difficult for mortals to reach, such as primeval forests, mountains and seas, or places that were shrouded in clouds and mist, there were places that were left empty in the eyes of mortals. There were no more immortals who could fly in the sky or burrow into the ground, and there were no more world-shocking magical powers. There were only richly ornamented buildings, jade palaces, and wonderful cave dwellings listening to the bleak wind. From then on, in the emptiness, they experienced fine winds and beautiful suns, drizzling rain, torrential rain, or heavy snowfall. Gradually, they would decay until the day the entire world would be peaceful and tranquil. Within the ruins of God, when the Nanming ancestor learned that his disciples had arrived, he personally came to pick them up and bring them back to the Great Flame Mountain. The commanders of the armies had no objections to this. After all, the Great War was imminent, and they had raised their cultivation. It would be bad if they did not have a suitable weapon. In the end, during a meeting of the commanders of the various armies, everyone agreed that it was not enough to just refine weapons. They should form another team that could refine pills to prevent the treatment of injuries during the war. Therefore, the people who were skilled in refining pills were transferred out from the various armies. When they found out that Guan Weiwu of the supporting Immortal Island had a past with Yu Qianqiu, they were all sensible people, so they unanimously recommended Guan Weiwu to be in charge of refining pills. In this regard, Yu Qianqiu did not express any objections. He mainly focused his energy on commanding the 10 armies in battle. When these guys gathered together to fight, even if they united, they would at most attack like a swarm of bees. They did not have the slightest military accomplishment to speak of. Among them, there were countless people who were crafty and deceitful. Even the commanders of the various armies did not have any military concept. They only knew that there were so many people under their command, and they were so excited that they rubbed their palms together. When they had nothing to do, they would ask Yu Qianqiu when he could pull them out for a fight. This matter gave Yu Qianqiu a headache, but it was not good to dampen their enthusiasm. However, if he allowed them to continue like this, they would sooner or later be taught a bloody lesson and suffer a great loss. After all, everyone's cultivation was not that high. No matter how many of them there were, they would not be able to fight against 1 or 2 experts. Therefore, Yu Qianqiu had no choice but to organize the commanders of the various armies to watch a good show. Zhang Peng led the hero army and gave everyone a super valiant training. It was called obedience, invincibility, and invincibility. The power of team coordination was displayed to the fullest, and the commanders of the various armies were shocked. On top of a tall hill in the eastern Holy Land, several hundred people stood together and looked down at the nearly 10,000 heroic soldiers who had gathered together after their training. Their ranks were as neat as tofu, and a powerful killing intent lingered in the air above them. Several hours had passed, but not a single person moved a single finger. The commanders of the various armies looked down silently, and their expressions were very solemn. They all thought of the situation where their subordinates had gathered together. That could only be called gathering, and not a formation. Not to mention the fact that the crowd was scattered and disorderly, all of them were standing unsteadily and looking left and right. When they gave orders, they had to rely on their profound cultivation and use the megaphone to shout wildly. Yet, they had been so proud of themselves for being able to command so many people. However, look at the commander of the other armies. With just a gesture, they would fight wherever he pointed and absolutely obey orders. After a long period of silence, many people looked at each other in dismay. They all understood why Yu Qianqiu had brought them here to watch. This group of prideful fellows understood the disparity between them. They had been led here by Yu Qianqiu to be slapped in the face by reality. All of them were instantly ashamed, and they all realized the disparity in their ability to command. Everyone. Yu Qianqiu, who was standing at the very front of the hill, finally spoke. He waved his hand and pointed at the orderly formation below. He sneered and said, "Don't be fooled by the fact that you have 1,000,000 subordinates. Do you believe that I only need these 10,000 people to defeat all of you? And this is under the condition that they are not fully equipped with the extraterrestrial metal armor. No. I'm wrong. Your subordinates can't be considered an army. They are just a motley crew." A gust of wind blew, and everyone's long robes became messy. All of them silently agreed with what Yu Qianqiu had said. After a long time, Yunan Tian, who was at the side, said in a weak voice, "Torture Master, you said it yourself. Our subordinates can't be considered an army. If we give them some time to train, they will naturally become something." "Oh." Yu Qianqiu made a long "oh" sound. He turned around and looked at the crowd with a disapproving smile on his face. He said, "Then I'll wait and see. However, I see that you are dressed so elegantly. You don't look like someone who can train an army to conquer the world. You are good at seducing women. How about this? I have an idea. Shuxin of Womanland also has more women in her subordinates and some merged sections. Moreover, most of the people in your sect are women. Moreover, it's really inconvenient for the division leaders to command if men and women mix together. Why don't we reorganize a division that belongs to women? You and Shushin can be partners." As soon as he said this, many of the division leaders couldn't help but burst into laughter. They all looked at Yunantian with ridicule. Many of them even joined in. "I think Torture Master's idea is not bad." Bullsh *T. Yunantian looked around and scolded. His face was gloomy. This was too embarrassing. However, it made the crowd laugh even harder. Shushin flashed out of the crowd and looked Yunantian up and down. She spat and said, "What's wrong with women? It's a good job for a man like you to mix with women. Don't be so shameless. We women don't care about you. Who do you think you are? Why don't you look at yourself in the mirror?" Yunantian sneered and said, "Of course." In Shushin's eyes, except for Nongju, who is a decent man, who else will she like? Shushin immediately sneered and said, "Of course. Nongju relies on the nature of a man, unlike you who put on a body full of hair to pretend." Then she bowed to Yu Qianqiu and said, "Torture Master, I agree with your decision to establish a division of women. However, Shushin disdains to be a partner with this man. Please transfer Nongju here to be my partner." Chapter 1141. Hearing this, Yu Qianqiu couldn't help but think of Chionghua Fairy, the head of the Moon clan who was under her command. If he really made Nongju fall in love with her, there would be a good show to watch. He really wanted to do that, but now was not the time for them to talk about love. He coughed and said, "In your dreams. Do you want Nongju to have a baby with you?" Hearing this, everyone burst into laughter. Yunantian laughed more happily than anyone else, as if he had vented his anger. Shu Xian bit her lips and raised her eyebrows. "If you really want to do that and Nongju agrees, Shu Xian will not object." Such courage made everyone burst into laughter again. "All right." Yu Qianqiu raised his hand to stop them from laughing. It was enough to relax for a while. They couldn't keep fooling around at this critical moment. His face darkened, and he said, "That's it. We will build an army composed of women. Yunantian will be the commander, and Shu Xian will assist." Before he finished his words, the two of them lost their voices and said, "Torture envoy." Yunantian didn't expect Yu Qianqiu to really do this. It was so unreasonable. And Shu Xian didn't want Yunantian to be above her. Why should a man be the commander of a women's army? Yu Qianqiu coldly glanced at them, causing them to swallow back their words. Then, he coldly glanced at the crowd, causing them to be unable to laugh. Then he continued slowly, "This is not a joke. An army with men and women training together is a real joke. When we go back, the 10 armies will discuss with each other and adjust the number of soldiers reasonably. Anyway, we will remove all the women and form the 11th army. I know that many of them are husband and wife or our relatives, but I'm doing this for the good of everyone. It's better to let the men do the fighting and the women do the logistics in the rear. I think they'll be happy for the safety of their relatives." He had this idea before and wanted to find an opportunity that everyone could accept. Otherwise, it would be more difficult to command a temporary army with a family living in a team. Secondly, they would have a group of hostages in their hands, which would more or less make the motley crew think twice. Yunantian and Shu Xian's faces became more and more gloomy. It turned out that they were in charge of a logistics team. The others had no objections to this. As long as it did not weaken their authority, it was fine. They all agreed to carry it out as soon as they returned. "Everyone. There are some things that I have to say first." Yu Qianqiu looked at the crowd and said, "Now that everyone's cultivation base is about the same, it doesn't matter who is in charge. If the corps commander of any legion is not capable enough, I don't mind recruiting more capable people from below. As for those who have made great contributions, they will be rewarded with unimaginable benefits in the future. Who knows, they might even have the opportunity to establish their own sect in the immortal world." As soon as these words were spoken, the atmosphere instantly became heavy. Putting aside the matter of whether he could establish a sect in the immortal dimension in the future, if the disciples he ordered around in the past were to order him around instead, then it would truly be a fatal matter. Only then did everyone realize that they had boarded Yu Qianzhou's pirate ship. It was too late for regrets. After a moment of silence, Hu Changshou suddenly walked out and cupped his hands, saying, "Torture envoy. You also know that we have no experience in leading an army to war. I see that Zhang Peng is quite proficient in this field. Can we ask him for some advice?" Everyone's eyes also looked at Zhang Peng, who was standing still in front of the formation below. Yu Qianzhou's gaze swept across everyone's faces. Seeing that everyone's faces were full of anticipation, he was instantly delighted. This was the effect he had spent a lot of effort to achieve. If he forced them to train, it would definitely cause these guys to resent him. If they did not actively cooperate, then it would be big trouble. He tilted his head and suddenly shouted, "Zhang Peng." Zhang Peng responded with a "yes" and flew up in a flash. Yu Qianzhou pointed at everyone and said, "Before the war, the training of the 11 legions will be handed over to you." Zhang Peng immediately accepted the order. After everyone returned to the Divine Ruin Realm, the core members of the various legions immediately surrounded Zhang Peng to ask for advice. Zhang Peng first explained to everyone the importance of the legion's hierarchy, then asked them to sort out this matter first. Everyone was smart and felt that it was reasonable. They immediately dispersed and hurriedly went to deal with this matter. By the time they came one after another to ask for advice, Zhang Peng had already divided the battle-hardened heroic army into 20 legions and let each legion lead 2 teams of people. One team would be used to train the people under them, and the other team would be sent to strictly enforce military discipline. How could a newly formed mob be so easy to train? As a result, on the same day, many of the troublemakers in the 10 legions were killed on the spot by the law enforcement team. In total, there were more than 10,000 people, and it almost caused an uproar. After all, everyone was now at the immortal realm, so there was no need to be afraid of them. However, in order to twist the evil aura of this group of repulsive people and get them on the right track as soon as possible, Yu Qianzhou made up his mind and sent Deming Luan, Wei Chuanxiu, and Yun Peng, these 3 immortal emperor-level experts, to patrol around. Yu Qianzhou's original words to the 3 of them were, "Don't be lenient, kill those who need to be killed." It was better for some of them to die now than all of them in the future. As a result, the 3 of them killed another 10,000 people the next day. Seeing that there were immortal emperor-level experts holding down the fort, killing them as easily as cutting vegetables, the mob immediately understood how insignificant they were. They were so scared that they kept quiet out of fear and became well-behaved. Their training was finally on the right track. In fact, most of these troublemakers were the subordinates of the various countries' lords, or people who were used to having power in their sections. Ordinary people didn't dare to jump around. As the training progressed, those people who usually didn't have the chance to raise their heads in their sects suddenly realized that under this strict hierarchy, no matter what your background was, as long as your results were better than others and you were more capable than others, the instructors would immediately give you a chance to be promoted. As for those who were mediocre, no matter how powerful your background was, they would immediately be beaten down. The rise of a group of powerless and insignificant people immediately set off a prairie fire in the 10 great legions. Those who had never had the chance to stand out immediately desperately seized this opportunity to stand out. As a result, the descendants of those with power and influence in the past were immediately unhappy. Those who were usually trampled under their feet were now bossing them around. How could they accept this? Hence, they all relied on their connections to find the lords of the legion's core, their fathers, or their masters to complain. The most typical example was Hu Changshou's son, Hu Yuntian. Hu Changshou couldn't help but be selfish in the initial stages of the establishment of the legion. 100,000 people were to be divided into 10 divisions, so he made his son a division commander. Needless to say, Hu Yuntian was quite happy to see so many subordinates under him. The military rules stated that as a division commander, his words were like a mountain to the tens of thousands of people under him. They had to obey his orders, and those who disobeyed would be directly punished by military law. This was much more power than when he borrowed his father's influence in the Cloud Palace. These people were all under his command. Hence, both openly and secretly, he promoted the wisdom of the torturer, Yu Qianqiu, and strongly supported the military management of the various forces. He also thought that since his father was the legion commander, it was only a matter of time before he was promoted from division commander to one of the 3 corps commanders. At that time, his authority would increase by several times. In order to facilitate his management in the future, he strongly opposed the original forces in the legion forming factions and disobeying the orders of their superiors. However, when the higher-ups began to send people down, he, the son of the legion commander, was demoted by the chief instructor during the training and assessment. He was demoted from division commander to company commander. In the end, the chief instructor said that with his current ability, he could only be a company commander at most. Imagine going from commanding tens of thousands of people to commanding hundreds of people. The difference was 100 times. Hu Yuntian was instantly furious, but he didn't dare to vent his anger on those heartless people. Hence, he went to find Hu Changshou. In the end, he was scolded by Hu Changshou. Hu Changshou said that his own position was in danger, so how could he have the time to care about him? After chasing his son away, Hu Changshou went to pester Zhang Peng to teach him military command experience. Similar things happened one after another in the early stages, but they received strong support from the majority of the people. After all, everyone had a chance to stand out. In just a few days, under the impact of the military system, the prestige system that the various sects and forces had maintained for hundreds or even thousands of years collapsed overnight. The various forces wanted to save the situation, but they couldn't. When they thought about it, they realized that Yu Qianqiu was too sinister. Helping him reorganize millions of people was definitely the stupidest thing to do. Otherwise, Yu Qianqiu would still need to rely on everyone. But now, if they didn't listen, Yu Qianqiu could kick them out at any time. Moreover, they wouldn't have anything left. This was definitely a huge scam. However, in the face of the tide, those who went with the flow would prosper, while those who went against the flow would die. In addition, there was no turning back. This group of people wanted to cry but had no tears. They could only compete with everyone else. The 11th division was made up of women, and it was the division with the largest number of people among the 11 divisions. Originally, there were very few women compared to men, but because all the women were gathered together, there were a total of 150,000 women, which was more than half the number of men in the other divisions. Seeing that many grassroots disciples in the other legions had become officials, these women were greatly moved. An undercurrent was brewing like a raging storm. At first, Yunnan Tian and Shu Xian didn't take it seriously. They could do whatever they wanted. After all, they were in the logistics department. So, this group of women was like herding sheep, wandering around aimlessly. When Yu Qianqiu started to cause trouble for these two people, he revealed that if they really didn't have the ability to lead this division, then they should be soldiers and let someone else lead them. Seeing that they were being serious, the two people panicked, especially Yunnan Tian. How could he accept the fact that women were leading them? They immediately asked Zhang Peng for help. Seeing that other places were on the right track, Zhang Peng transferred a group of people from the law enforcement team to help them reorganize. Zhang Peng was indeed very busy. Not only did he have to take care of the entire base, he also had to give lessons to the division leaders who pestered him every day. After the great Ming Luan trio, who were patrolling around, understood the cause and effect of the entire matter, they were sincerely convinced of Yu Qianqiu's abilities for the first time. Such a large conspiracy had been carried out in such a secretive manner. Unexpectedly, no one had noticed anything fishy about it. His methods were truly capable of changing the weather with one turn of his hand. In such a short period of time, more than 1 million people were trained into obedience. They abandoned their original deep-rooted notions of power and quickly and willingly accepted his orders. Moreover, everyone was fighting to join him for fear of falling behind. How many people could have such ability? Chapter 1142. Since there were no more violations, De Ming Luan and the other two didn't need to patrol around anymore. On this day, when the three of them returned to the base, they passed by Furong and the other women and heard them grumbling, blaming Yu Qianqiu for not letting them participate in such a lively event. Especially Ze, she pouted and said to the women, "You are all beauties in his harem. It's fine if he keeps you in his harem, but why doesn't he let me do this and that? It's so boring." Wei Chuanxiu, who was passing by, couldn't help but chuckle and say, "Little girl, that brat must have his reasons for doing this. Just listen to him. Otherwise, hee. I've finally learned something. That brat's methods are really powerful." The women looked at him in confusion. Ze was also familiar with him, so she immediately pestered him and asked with wide eyes, "What did the big liar do this time?" Hee. "You're right, he is indeed a big liar." Wei Chuanxiu immediately analyzed the things that Yu Qianqiu had done recently to the women. First, they used the invasion of the demon realm to scare the lords of the various countries. Then, they encouraged the lords to use their respective rallying powers to gather all the cultivators in one place. They raised everyone's cultivation to the immortal realm before bringing them back. Then, he used his power to lure the feudal lords and the original forces to help him straighten out the millions of people. Then, he tricked the feudal lords to watch a show, and made them take the initiative to ask for more training. Only then did Yu Qianqiu set up a set of design system for the millions of people. In the end, it didn't take long for the millions of people to completely change their views on sections. Everyone didn't take their original sects and feudal lords seriously, and only wanted to stand out and climb up under his system. Thus, in a short period of time, Yu Qianqiu completely won over the millions of people under his command. So many forces collapsed in the blink of an eye, and merged into Yu Qianqiu's force. Do you guys think that brat is a big liar? Do you guys think that brat is powerful? Wei Chuanxiu walked towards the depths of the base while shaking his head and sighing, "Powerful. How amazing. I've lived for so long, but this is the first time I've seen someone use such a strange method to control so many people. It's thousands of times more powerful than conquering people by force." If Jin Tai and Bai Qi had used this system in the immortal realm and the netherworld, they wouldn't have fallen to such a state, tsk. What they didn't know was that this was just their own analysis. To Yu Qianqiu, this was just going with the flow. Of course, there was no lack of scheming. However, from Yu Qianqiu's point of view, this system was just a system that had been perfected in his previous life. He had only roughly imitated it from his previous life. He had not designed it at all, and it was not as powerful and exaggerated as Wei Chuanxiu had described. Of course, it seemed to have a good effect in the short term, but as time passed, it would not be able to withstand the corrosion of human greed. Most importantly, everyone's cultivation level was about the same now, so he had only borrowed it for a while. He definitely did not think that it was as exaggerated as Wei Chuanxiu had described. However, for Furong and the others, after hearing Wei Chuanxiu's description, they felt as if they had seen a huge net that had been meticulously laid out step by step. It was like a monster that could devour the heavens and swallow 1,000,000 people in one gulp. Just thinking about it was too terrifying. They felt that Yu Qianqiu's schemes were too frightening. Immortal Crocodile and Ji Wu looked at each other, stunned by Wei Chuanxiu's analysis. Ze watched Wei Chuanxiu leave with her mouth wide open. After a long time, she gulped and said, "Big liar, he deceived so many people at once. It's too scary." Beside her, the Allure Beauty shook her head slightly and said, "In such a chaotic world, a man should be like this. Otherwise, how can he achieve anything? This is not scary. It can only be said that his ability is something that others can't even beg for." Furong and the others also shook their heads to get rid of the terrible haze that Wei Chuanxiu had described in their minds, and then nodded in agreement with the Allure Beauty's words. It just so happened that Yu Qianqiu had straightened out the matters in the Divine Ruin Realm, and the matter of arranging weapons for everyone was put on the agenda. He couldn't let so many people still use weapons from the human world to fight against the people of the demon realm. Before leaving, he called Hong Qi over, and the two of them walked over while talking. The mother and daughter were crying and saying that you killed Ma Zhougu. What's going on? Yu Qianqiu asked with a frown. Hong Qi did listen to him and kidnapped by Hua Fairy and Yan Zixia, but the mother and daughter acted like he was an irreconcilable enemy when they saw him. They questioned him, saying that Ma Jiugu had no grievances with him, so why didn't he let her go? Yan Zixia was even more desperate to fight with him, but her cultivation was sealed, so she couldn't hurt anyone. Then, she took the initiative to ask Ferdinand, who was guarding them, to forcibly take them away. Looking at Ferdinand's appearance, he was also quite emotional, and his expression was somewhat inexplicable, as if he was afraid that he would hurt the mother and daughter, so he volunteered to guard them. Yu Qianqiu had a lot of things to do, so he didn't pay attention to them at first, but before he left, he couldn't help but call Hong Qi over to ask what was going on. Hong Qi smiled bitterly and said, "Master, I didn't want to. Killing people is not something to be happy about. But that old woman stayed with the mother and daughter day and night. When I took action, that old woman risked her life to protect them. I remembered that Master said that anyone who dares to stop me will be killed, so I directly killed her. Oh. Right, I also killed a beautiful woman, who turned out to be a toad demon. Don't worry, Master. Nobody knows that the mother and daughter were kidnapped by us. Those who know have been killed by me, and I have also disposed of their corpses cleanly." The last sentence sounded like he was bragging. Yu Qianqiu was stunned and said, "Lan Bingxue was also killed by you?" He still wanted to find this B***tch to settle the score with Furong one day, but he didn't expect this disciple to make the first move. It seemed that this kid had been in the gang for a long time, and he was not careless when it came to killing flowers. "Did you kill the wrong person?" Hong Qi asked a little weakly. Yu Qianqiu waved his hand helplessly and said, "Forget it. So be it. You go and do your thing." He now finally understood why Ferdinand looked a little weird. He probably knew that Lan Bingxue was killed from the mother and daughter. After all, the two used to be husband and wife. No matter how big the conflict between them was, it would be a lie to say that he didn't feel anything after knowing that the person was dead. Looking at the back of Hong Qi leaving, he shook his head helplessly and smiled bitterly. Just when he walked a few steps with his hands behind his back, he saw a group of women in the hall of the base looking at him strangely, as if they didn't know him. He couldn't help but be stunned and touched his face. He didn't wear a mask. He was a little stunned and said, "What's wrong with you guys?" The women shook their heads together to show that it was nothing. Zi looked at Hong Qi, who had disappeared, and asked weakly, "Yu Qianqiu, what are you and Hong Qi whispering about? Are you thinking of doing something bad again?" "Psycho." Yu Qianqiu snorted. Just when he was about to turn into the passage on the side, he suddenly stopped and stared at Zi for a while with deep meaning. He wondered if he should arrange for Jasper Flower Fairy to meet this woman. It would be good to have a mother to teach her how to be a woman so that she wouldn't always talk nonsense when she saw him. But when he thought of Nongzhu's attitude, it seemed a little immoral for him to fan the fire in her backyard when she went to do something for him. After hesitating for a while, he temporarily gave up the idea. Zi was stared at by his strange eyes and then thought of Wei Chuanxiu's words. She suddenly felt creeped out. The other women also looked at each other. At this moment, Zhang Peng rushed in from outside. After bowing to his master and showing respect to the women, he reported to Yu Qianqiu, "Master, I accidentally found Shi Wenguang's son, Shi Xiaotian, in the army." He meant to ask if Yu Qianqiu had any instructions. He knew that Yu Qianqiu and Shi Xiaotian used to have a good friendship. He vaguely remembered that Shi Xiaotian had always called his master boss at that time, so he said this. "Shi Xiaotian?" Yu Qianqiu was startled. Only now did he remember that he hadn't seen this kid for many years and had almost forgotten about him. He couldn't help but click his tongue and said, "Hong Qi and the others really plundered all the cultivators in the mortal world clean. Even Shi Xiaotian, who was hiding in the imperial palace, was pulled over by them. By the way, since Shi Xiaotian is here, he should have seen me when he was in the cornucopia and should know that I am here. Why didn't he come to me? Could it be that there are obstructions?" "That's not it." Zhang Peng smiled and said, "I asked him after I saw him. He seems to be a little worried that you won't recognize him now that your status is different." He's afraid that you won't recognize him anymore. He's afraid that something awkward will happen if he suddenly asks to see you, so he wants to see you but doesn't dare to. I've already brought him to you. He's just outside. Do you want to see him? This kid. Yu Qianqiu also chuckled twice, raised his hand, and said, "This boy was once a brother who went through thick and thin with me. Since he came, no matter how busy he is, I have to see him. Invite him to the conference room. I want to catch up with him." Zhang Peng accepted the order and left. Yu Qianqiu first went to the base's conference room while the women were discussing who this Shi Xiaotian was. Furong, who had seen Shi Xiaotian in the northwest barracks, roughly explained his identity. Not long after, a nervous Shi Xiaotian was led in. He didn't dare to look around, but when he saw a group of beautiful women staring at him, he quickly lowered his head. He didn't notice that Hibiscus was greeting him with an expectant look on her face, so he followed Zhang Peng into the passageway. After Zhang Peng led him to the door of the conference room, he stretched his hand and said, "Master is waiting for you inside. I won't disturb you anymore." After saying that, he left. Shi Xiaotian looked left and right, feeling a little uneasy at the door. He nervously rubbed his hands together and finally gritted his teeth and slowly walked in. Chapter 1143. Walking lightly into the spacious conference room, Shi Xiaotian saw Yu Qianqiu's familiar and warm smile at first glance. Shi Xiaotian's tense heart had just relaxed when he saw Yu Qianqiu's face gradually surging with a solemn expression. His heart immediately tightened again. He respectfully saluted and said, "Punishment envoy. Don't be so distant. There's no need to be like this between us." Yu Qianqiu sighed and shook his head. Actually, Shi Xiaotian had misunderstood him. He just suddenly realized that Shi Xiaotian had changed from that inexperienced youth to a tough middle-aged man. He felt like he was dreaming. He thought back to how pathetic they were when they escaped from Anquangsung. In the blink of an eye, decades had passed. However, the Yu Qianqiu in Shi Xiaotian's eyes was still the same as before. Other than the baptism of hardships on his face, his entire aura had changed. He was no longer hiding in his own house and didn't dare to go out. His appearance didn't seem to have changed much. Seeing that he was still a little reserved, Yu Qianqiu took the initiative to walk over and naturally put his arm on Shi Xiaotian's shoulder. He chuckled and said, "Xiaotian, I didn't expect a pretty boy like you to become so manly. It seems like you've seen many beauties in your family's palace." Although it was a teasing remark, such a familiar action immediately made Shi Xiaotian feel as if a heavy burden had been lifted off his shoulders. He realized that his boss was still the same boss and hadn't changed at all. Thus, the big man instantly became teary-eyed. He turned around and grabbed Yu Qianqiu's arm and choked, "Boss. What are you crying for? You're disgusting." Yu Qianqiu pushed him away. He didn't expect Shi Xiaotian to still be that unlucky person who cried at the slightest provocation. He pulled a chair behind him and sat down. He looked at Shi Xiaotian like he was looking at a playboy and said, "What's going on? Since you saw me, why didn't you come to find me? Take a seat and tell me slowly." He hooked a chair with his leg. Shi Xiaotian felt a little embarrassed under his gaze. He rubbed his eyes, sat opposite him, and told him the reason. It turned out that his current identity was already the state preceptor Yongzhen of the Huaxia Empire. After listening to Yu Qianqiu's words, he had never had much contact with the people of the cultivation world. However, when Yu Qianqiu ordered all the cultivators to gather at the cornucopia, he was a dignified state preceptor of the Huaxia Empire and could be considered a person with a little fame in the cultivation world. Naturally, Hong Gang and Qin Gang couldn't miss him when they summoned people. When he received the notice that it was Yu Qianqiu who gathered all the cultivators in the world, he was extremely excited and eagerly ran to the gathering. When he arrived at the cornucopia, he saw millions of cultivators, among which there were even many experts. However, these people all worshipped Yu Qianqiu. He immediately understood that Yu Qianqiu was now the ruler of the world. Although he was some state preceptor, he didn't even have the qualifications to speak to Yu Qianqiu. He saw Yu Qianzhou's several appearances at the cornucopia, and he also hoped that Yu Qianzhou could see him. However, Yu Qianzhou's eyes only swept past him and didn't linger on him at all. This further dispelled the idea of rashly looking for Yu Qianzhou. To be exact, he didn't dare to do so. After that, he saw Yu Qianzhou communicating with the heavenly thunder on the cornucopia to help everyone forge the immortal body. This made him tremble with fear and didn't dare to be presumptuous. It was also here that he accidentally met Zhang Peng, an acquaintance. Otherwise, it would be difficult for the two to recognize each other even though they were so close. The conference room fell silent. Yu Qianzhou didn't say a word. He had gained a lot and lost a lot along the way. As long as he continued to walk the path, such things would be unavoidable. Gains and losses would always accompany him. Shi Xiaotian looked at him silently. Thinking back to when the two of them were still working hard in Anquansung, he never thought that Yu Qianzhou's future achievements would reach such heights. He didn't know that there was always someone better than him. After a long silence, Yu Qianzhou slowly said, "Xiaotian, you should go back to the human world." Shi Xiaotian was startled and then said anxiously, "Boss. Let me stay by your side and travel the 3 realms with you." After coming to the Divine Ruin Realm and coming into contact with so many people and things, he realized that the outside world was actually so vast and so exciting. It was much more interesting than being the Imperial Preceptor in the human world. Moreover, he had such a powerful boss to protect him. He hadn't even seen the immortal and netherworld yet. How could he go back? Yu Qianzhou gently waved his hand and said with a faint smile, "The outside world isn't as fun as you think. There's a price to pay for fun. You might not think so. Now that you have forged the immortal body, it's better for you to stay in the human world and enjoy your wealth. You and I are brothers, this is all I can help you with. Let's go. Don't say any more, I'll send you back." With a wave of his hand, Shi Xiaotian suddenly felt the scene change. When it stabilized, he found that he had returned to the back garden of the Pillar of State General's residence. However, there was no one living here now. His entire family had moved into the palace, and only a few servants were here to take care of it. Shi Xiaotian looked around and knew that it was useless to say anything else. He forced a smile and said, "I didn't expect boss to still remember this place." Boss. Since you're already here, go to the palace and rest for a while. My father often mentions you and has been longing to see you again. I almost forgot, your family is already the royal family. It's good to know the way. Lead the way. Yu Qianzhou said with a faint smile. Shi Xiaotian let out a happy sigh and flew into the sky. Yu Qianzhou followed closely behind. The two of them quickly flew over the bustling capital city below and directly entered the grand palace. Under a gold-plated Yongzhen plaque, Shi Xiaotian invited Yu Qianzhou to sit in the imperial advisor's mansion. The eunuchs and attendants were ordered by Shi Xiaotian to work around the clock to serve Yu Qianzhou. Those eunuchs and attendants secretly looked at Yu Qianzhou in surprise, wondering who this young man was to make imperial advisor Yongzhen, who was second only to the emperor, treat him with such respect. Therefore, they didn't dare to neglect him. Yu Qianzhou didn't have the time to slowly enjoy this ostentatious scene. He told Shi Xiaotian to stop wasting time and quickly invite his family to meet him. Shi Xiaotian asked him to wait for a moment and quickly ran away. The group of eunuchs was even more shocked. This person actually dared to order the godlike imperial preceptor Yongzhen around like this. For a moment, they were so nervous that they didn't even dare to breathe loudly. They waited for a full 2 hours. Yu Qianzhou looked around the grand imperial preceptor Yongzhen and was still wondering why he was taking so long. Outside the door, a large group of men, women, old and young had already arrived. There were more than 100 people rushing in. Some of them were even infants in the arms of the women waiting to be fed. However, all of them were dressed luxuriously. The people in the front were all wearing yellow dragon robes. One look and one could tell that they were the descendants of the royal family. Many of them seemed to be puzzled. They didn't know why they were called here in such a hurry. Yu Qianzhou immediately saw Shi Wenguang, who looked vigorous despite his old age. Behind him were his sons and daughters-in-law. He didn't know the men, women, or children behind them, but it was obvious that they were all from the same family. Yu Qianqiu thought to himself, my goodness, the royal family is indeed different. It's amazing how they spread their branches and leaves. Just as a smile appeared on his face, Shi Wenguang, who was wearing the dragon robe, was already in front of him. He was the first to kneel down and excitedly called out, Mr. Regardless of whether they knew what was going on or not, when they saw the emperor kneeling down, they immediately followed suit in fear and called out, Mr. Shi Shaotian hurriedly stepped aside in embarrassment. The group of eunuchs and attendants were shocked by this scene, and immediately knelt down as well in horror. Yu Qianqiu, on the other hand, sat there calmly. He crossed his legs and raised his hand, saying, Rise, all of you. Rise. He also felt that he deserved this bow. He had given the greatest wealth in the mortal world to their family and saved their lives. It was not too much to accept their bow. Shi Wenguang immediately led a large group of his family members and stood up. Yu Qianqiu also stood up with a smile and walked in front of him, saying, General Shi, you are still strong despite your age. Congratulations. He was too lazy to change the way he addressed him. It's all thanks to Mr.'s favor. Mr. is still as elegant as ever, like a celestial being. Shi Wenguang can only envy you. Shi Wenguang was filled with endless gratitude. He was almost 90 years old, but he was still more spirited than his own descendants. He understood that this was the result of Yu Qianqiu's immortal elixir back then. He was even thinking of finding a suitable opportunity to ask for a few more. Yu Qianqiu smiled and turned his gaze to behind Shi Wenguang. There were 4 familiar faces who were used to a good life and had already changed their figures. There were 2 old men who were close to the end of their lives, and 2 graceful women. He pointed at them one by one and said with a smile, Shi Yu Tian, Shi Yin Tian, Bao Wanshi, Sidu Hui. Haha. Did I remember correctly? Greetings, Mr. The 4 people who were called out were pleasantly surprised and hurriedly came forward to salute. When the 2 women saw that the man who had some entanglements with them in the past was still as young as before, their eyes couldn't help but shine with admiration. Among them, Shi Yu Tian was even more excited. He had always been interested in becoming an immortal. Back then, he thought that Yu Qianqiu was a celestial being and had always wanted to follow him to cultivate. Now that he saw Yu Qianqiu's youthful appearance, he couldn't help but feel his heart itch. Where's Madame Li? Yu Qianqiu glanced at the crowd and didn't see the mistress of the house, Li Hongniang. As soon as he said this, the atmosphere suddenly became heavy. Shi Yin Tian explained in a low voice, Mr. Mother passed away 5 years ago. I see. Yu Qianqiu nodded slightly and consoled, birth, old age, sickness, and death are the laws of nature. Everyone, don't be too sad. His words were pleasant to the ears. Why didn't he look at himself standing there with his youthful appearance? Who wouldn't be envious of him? Moreover, Shi Wenguang had lived a long life because of him. Once a person reached the peak of riches and honor, he would naturally desire longevity. Shi Yu Tian suddenly thought of something and hurriedly called out a group of juniors from the crowd to greet Yu Qianqiu. He even pulled their faces in front of Yu Qianqiu, as if he wanted Yu Qianqiu to take a closer look at them. In the end, the second son's daughter-in-law was also enlightened. She also pulled out her juniors for a walk. Yu Qianqiu glanced at the anxious Shi Yu Tian. He could see that this guy still hadn't changed. He didn't have the aptitude to cultivate, and he placed all his hopes on the juniors. Even the second son's daughter-in-law was infected. Chapter 1144. Not to mention that he didn't have the time, even if he did, he wouldn't take away such a large group of cultivators in the human world and cultivate a new group for the royal family. He didn't want to embarrass Shi Shaotian, so he perfunctorily told the group of princes, grandsons, and princesses that the people should be the foundation. He also emphasized that if he found anyone who bullied the people in the future, he would personally deal with them sooner or later. After scaring the group of juniors into submission, Yu Qianqiu used the excuse that he was tired and drove all of them away. Only Shi Xiaotian, who was apologizing, was left in the hall. With his back facing him, Yu Qianqiu picked up a cup of fragrant tea and took 2 sips. Suddenly, he opened his palm, and 2 golden tokens quickly condensed and appeared in his hand. He threw them behind him and said, "Look carefully." Shi Xiaotian took the 2 tokens and looked at them carefully. There were 2 sides, one was engraved with the word order, and the other was engraved with the word country guardian. The surrounding decorations were all kinds of lifelike birds and beasts. The 2 tokens were exactly the same. After looking at them, he asked in confusion, "Boss, is this for me?" Yu Qianqiu put down the teacup in his hand and took back one of the tokens. He shook it and said, "You can use this token as a keepsake in the future. I'll give one to you, and I'll give the other to someone else. If one day someone comes to find you with this token, try to help them in a discreet way. You can only help them 3 times at most. After 3 times, you can take back this token." Shi Xiaotian nodded and said, "I'll remember." Yu Qianqiu put away the token and said indifferently, "There's one more thing I want to tell you. I've always hoped that the human world will be the human world, and that the grievances between mortals don't need to be interfered with by others. This is also one of the reasons why I drove all the cultivators in the human world away. Next, if possible, I'll get rid of all the demons and ghosts in the human world, so that the human world can be peaceful and fair. But I left you, a person who has already forged an immortal body, in the human world. I hope you understand my good intentions, and I also hope that you are worthy of the 2 words eternal suppression on this token that I gave you. After my wish is fulfilled, I hope that you can forever guard the peace of the human world, and not let any demons or ghosts in this world extend their hands into the human world." Shi Xiaotian didn't expect Yu Qianqiu to entrust the entire human world to him. In the midst of his excitement, he found that Yu Qianqiu had already disappeared. In a small town with simple folk customs in Huaxia, Yu Qianqiu quietly appeared in a luxurious mansion. He looked around and found that it was very different from when he left. On the basis of the old mansion, many nearby residences had been annexed. The old mansion still looked the same, but the new mansion with richly ornamented beams and painted rafters clearly showed the rich identity of the owner. Yu Qianqiu frowned and slowly strolled into the colorful garden. This was the place where he resettled his family. After seeing Shi Xiaotian's family in the palace, he thought of his own home, so he decided to come and have a look. As a result, he saw a rich family. A few servants in the garden saw a stranger suddenly strolling in. From his clothes, he didn't look like someone important. They were about to question him, but they found that this person had an extraordinary aura as he strolled in the garden. He didn't look like an ordinary person, so they obediently shut their mouths. Not long after, a middle-aged man who looked like a housekeeper rushed over. He looked at Yu Qianqiu, then cupped his hands and smiled apologetically. "I'm the housekeeper of the Yu mansion. May I ask which new guest has come? Why haven't I seen you before?" It was still the Yu mansion. Yu Qianqiu indifferently said, "Tell Yu Wuchou to come see me. Our master is in the reception hall discussing business with a guest. Please wait for a moment, I'll go inform him." The housekeeper nodded and bowed before running away. He had wanted to find out who the other party was. Why would someone suddenly appear? Even he, the housekeeper, did not know who this person was. However, when he thought about how there were people guarding the front and back doors, as well as the fact that there were also guards guarding the house, ordinary people would not be able to barge in. Hearing the other party's tone, he did not dare to be negligent. Not long after the housekeeper left, a fat man barged into the garden. He looked to be about 17 or 18 years old, but he was followed by 4 or 5 hedonistic sons of similar age. They walked in carelessly without a care for anyone else. A servant girl passing by bowed in surprise and called out, "Eldest young master." However, the eldest young master's scoundrel friends took advantage of her. She felt so wrong that she bit her lip and wanted to cry, but she did not dare to say anything. "Eldest young master?" Yu Qianqiu raised an eyebrow as he looked at the fat man. He thought to himself, could this be my nephew? His gaze gradually turned cold as he walked to the center of the road with his hands behind his back. He stared coldly at the few hedonistic sons who had barged in. When the hedonistic sons saw that someone was blocking their way, they looked at each other and stopped. The fat man looked at Yu Qianzhou with uncertainty. He could not figure out where this person had come from. He actually dared to block the eldest young master's way in his own home. Yu Qianzhou could tell that although this fat man was a hedonistic son, he was also a shrewd person. He had learned to read people's expressions at such a young age. I am the eldest young master of the Yu residence. May I know who you are, and why are you blocking our way in the inner garden of my house? The fat man cupped his chubby hands and asked. Yu Qianzhou said calmly, I do not know the eldest young master of the Yu residence. I just happened to pass by the back door and saw that it was open. I wanted to come in and ask for a cup of water. The hedonistic sons were stunned. This was the first time they had encountered something like this. The fat man was even more suspicious. There were people guarding the front and back doors of his house. It did not seem like it was that easy to enter. At this moment, the housekeeper hurriedly ran back. He first bowed to the fat man, then smiled apologetically at the hedonistic sons who addressed him as Young Master Li and Young Master Zhang. Finally, he walked up to Yu Qianzhou and said in a deep voice, Who are you? My master said that there are no new guests in the house. You do not have the right to know who I am. Yu Qianzhou looked out of the garden and chuckled coldly. It seems that I cannot invite him. Oh. You really are trespassing on private property. Yuiwu, trespassing on private property can be reported to the authorities. What authorities? Just beat him out of here. The group of hedonistic sons began to fan the flames. The fat man's expression immediately became twisted. He took a few steps forward and grabbed Yu Qianzhou's collar. However, he found that he could not move it at all. Before he could say anything, he saw Yu Qianzhou give him a slap at lightning speed. Pa! The fat man's body flew into the air. He had probably never flown so happily in his entire life. He directly crashed into the nursery garden a few meters away. Ah! The disorderly flowering shrubs immediately let out a miserable howl that sounded like a pig being slaughtered. Yu Qianzhou laughed coldly. It was already not bad that he could still scream. If it was not for the fact that he was his nephew, he would have taken his life on the spot. You dare to hit someone? Let's go together. The group of hedonistic sons were very united. With a shout, they immediately rushed forward shoulder to shoulder. In the end, there was a series of pa-pa sounds. Figures flew everywhere. The nursery garden was filled with miserable howls that sounded like pigs being slaughtered. Just as the housekeeper went to help the eldest young master up, he saw the eldest young master, whose face was swollen like a pig's head, yell indistinctly, Guards! Guards! Where the hell did everyone go? Actually, there was no need for him to shout. A group of household servants who were guarding the house had already rushed over with their weapons. The eldest young master pointed with his finger and yelled indistinctly, Beat him to death. I will take responsibility for beating him to death. The group of household servants immediately rushed forward, yelling and beating him with sticks like rain. Who knew that as soon as they rushed forward, a group of people would be sent flying? One by one, they lay on the ground. Ouch, ouch, ouch. They didn't even see how Yu Qianzhou made his move, and they couldn't get up. The rest of the people were shocked and didn't dare to approach. They didn't know that this was because Yu Qianzhou didn't want to make a big deal out of it because it was his own family. He also didn't want to shock the world. Otherwise, with his temper, he was afraid that not a single one of these people would survive. The fat young master and the few hedonistic sons who staggered to get up were dumbfounded. The first thought that came to their minds was that they had encountered an expert in Jianghu. It was the first time that they had seen such a handsome person. The fat young master covered half of his swollen face and looked left and right. It was obvious that these household servants were no match for this expert. Meanwhile, Yu Wuchou, who was discussing business in the flower hall, was finally alarmed by the movement here. A burst of hurried footsteps came from outside the garden. Yu Qianqiu, who had 3 strands of long beard on his face, rushed over with a group of servants. Seeing this movement, everyone fell to the ground. The servants ran to their son, who had been beaten into a pig's head, and asked what had happened. Naturally, the spearhead was pointed at Yu Qianqiu without exception. The group of servants immediately roared, and some even questioned Yu Wuqiu about what had happened. How could there be someone in the family who would hurt someone? Yu Wuqiu, who was already 40 years old, saw Yu Qianqiu standing in the air. How could he not recognize him? He was stunned as if he had been struck by lightning. He said, "Big. Big. Big." Just as he was about to call him big brother, he was glared at by Yu Qianqiu. He immediately realized that his big brother didn't want to reveal his identity. "Is this foppish fatty your son?" Yu Qianqiu pouted at the fat young master and said. Yu Wuqiu immediately ran over with sweat on his head and said with embarrassment, "Big. Why didn't you tell me that you were coming? Is there some misunderstanding?" When the group of servants and foppish young masters saw Yu Wuqiu's appearance, they immediately looked at each other in surprise and doubt. Almost without exception, from the word big, they thought of a certain person. Businessmen were most afraid of fighting with officials, so for a moment, they all quieted down. "Haven't I already asked someone to inform you? You are very arrogant now. Even I can't invite you. I didn't expect it to be so difficult to see you, and you are such a good son." Yu Qianqiu once again pouted at the fat young master and said, "You actually dared to make a move against me and even said that you wanted to kill me. The son you taught is really promising." Ah! Yu Wuqiu was shocked. His elder brother was like a celestial being who could fly in the sky and burrow into the earth. Moreover, he had a group of incomparably powerful subordinates. Any one of them was a celestial being that mortals couldn't even beg for. His son had actually attacked his elder brother. Taking 10,000 steps back, there was no reason for a nephew to hit his uncle. Besides, in the future, he still hoped to rely on this big brother to help him when he was in trouble. Yu Wuqiu was really angry. He glared at his fat son and shouted angrily, "Unfilial son. Come here." The fat young master was so scared that his whole body trembled. He covered his swollen face with one hand and secretly pulled the housekeeper with the other, meaning to ask the housekeeper to come forward and plead for him. Chapter 1145. What matters could be pleaded for and what matters could not be pleaded for, a steward would naturally be able to figure out from his master's words and actions. This time, the master was really angry. The steward sighed in his heart and stole a glance at Yu Qianqiu. He knew that he had provoked a big shot who could not be provoked. So, not only did he not plead for the young master, but he reached out and pushed the young master's fat waist, motioning him to obediently admit his mistake. The steward also understood that the young master was the master's son after all. No matter how angry the master was, he would at most punish the young master. He would not really do anything to the young master. Would he kill him? The fat young master glanced at his gang of scoundrels. As a result, everyone could see that he had provoked a big shot. Those who could bully others naturally knew better than ordinary people that they could not bully those who were more powerful than them. So, they all showed a look of, "Brother, you're on your own. Unfilial son. You dare to disobey my words?" Yu Wuqiu roared again. His face was distorted with anger. The fat young master trembled with fear. In addition, the steward beside him gently pushed him. He finally covered the left side of his swollen face, trembling with fear, and weakly called out, "Father. I'll beat you to death, you unfilial son." Without saying anything, Yu Wuqiu also slapped him. With a slap, the fat young master staggered and a bright red palm print appeared on the right side of his face. But compared to Yu Qianqiu's slap, it was naturally much better. He did not fly up. He could still bear this little pain. "Kneel." Yu Wuqiu pointed in front of Yu Qianqiu's feet. He wanted his son to kneel and apologize to his elder brother. What a joke. Yu Wucho knew better than anyone that his son had suffered a little grievance. As long as his elder brother could forgive him, the benefits in the future would be unimaginable. If he really offended his elder brother, it would be too late for regrets. The group of outsiders became even more bewildered, and they were certain that Yu Qianqiu was some great figure. Otherwise, Yu Wucho wouldn't have believed that it was his son's fault without even asking whether it was right or wrong. Those who were more quick-witted turned around and slapped their own sons, baffling them. Then, they grabbed their confused sons by the ears and dragged them to Yu Qianqiu's side. They kicked the back of his knees and forced him to kneel down. Only then did they cup their hands to Yu Qianqiu and said, "A great man does not remember the mistakes of a lowly man. My son has offended you, please forgive him." When he took the lead, the others thought that he had recognized who it was, and in the end, they all followed suit. A series of slapping sounds rang out, and the group of good-for-nothings were all dragged over to kneel and apologize, causing the two brothers, Yu Qianqiu and Yu Wucho, to be stunned. The fat young master was immediately dumbfounded. He did not need his father to yell again. Without saying, he knelt, kneeled, and knelt said. He not. Lord? Yu Qianqiu suddenly understood. This group of rich landlords thought he was an official. He was too lazy to argue with these mortals. However, he made up his mind to punish the people in his family. He pointed at the fat young master and said, "You. Come here." The fat young master secretly glanced at his father. Seeing that his father was about to kick, he quickly got up and slowly moved over. "Which hand hit me just now?" Yu Qianqiu said indifferently, "Take it out and let me see." Yu Wucho's pupils constricted, and he suddenly had a bad feeling. He'd witnessed his big brother's decisiveness in killing. Even though he was young all those years ago, he'd personally witnessed his big brother cleansing an entire stronghold of bandits with blood, and that scene was deeply engraved in his mind. Then, he saw his son weakly stretch out a fat hand. Yu Wucho suddenly felt his throat go dry. He wanted to say something, but he could not. "Ah!" A mournful howl echoed throughout the Yu mansion. The fat young master was already kneeling on the ground. He opened his mouth and let out a dry howl. His face was deathly pale. Yu Qianqiu had pinched his palm, and his entire right palm had already been crushed into a bloody pulp. Blood spurted out and splashed onto his friends on both sides. The group of foppish playboys were so frightened that they collapsed to the ground. Their faces turned pale in an instant. The group of rich landlords were also frightened to the point of trembling. They hurriedly dragged their sons away, afraid that they would also be killed. Yu Wucho looked at his big brother with a pale face. His son fainted on the ground. Yu Wucho's heart felt like it was being cut by a knife. This was his son. How could his big brother be so cruel? However, he did not dare to say or do anything. Irrelevant people, get lost. Yu Qianqiu glanced at the crowd and said. The group of rich landlords immediately cupped their hands and bid farewell to Yu Wucho. They hurriedly grabbed their weak sons and ran away. It was also at this time that a few women who had heard the news rushed over. The woman in the lead fell to the ground and hugged her unconscious son, crying loudly. Not long after, she also fainted. The other women called out a few times, but saw that the master was standing there in a daze as if he did not see anything. They then hurriedly called for the servants to carry the fainted mother and son away for treatment. Find a quiet place. I have something to say to you. Yu Qianqiu turned around and said. Yu Wucho recovered from his daze and led his big brother into the old mansion with difficulty. After entering the main hall of the old mansion, Yu Wucho said bitterly, "My parents were afraid that you would not be able to find a place when you came back. They never agreed to let us renovate this old mansion, so they kept it in the new mansion. Where are my parents? Are they well?" Yu Qianqiu asked with his back facing him. "Better than us children," Yu Wucho muttered. Yu Wucho muttered, "My parents are used to farming in Utopia, so they bought a few pieces of land at the foot of Nanshan with a few farmers to farm. They said that if you came back, they would let you go over and take a look. What? You think I was too harsh on your son? Yu Qianqiu turned around and asked. Yu Wuqiu said, Big brother must have his reasons for doing this. Humph. I'm afraid that's not what you think. Yu Qianqiu stared at him and sneered. If it wasn't for the sake of our family, I could have taken his life today. It wouldn't have been worth the effort. He has such bad habits at such a young age. It shows what kind of a father you are. If I hadn't seen and heard it, I wouldn't have dared to do this. Why are you and your son so arrogant? Do you really think that no one in this world can deal with you? It's good that you met me today. If you fall into someone else's hands in the future, no one will be merciful. Today, I broke one of his hands so that when he does evil in the future, he will think about today's pain and have some scruples. At the same time, it's also for you to remember. I will remember Big Brother's lesson. Yu Wuqiu bowed and said. In fact, he didn't think much of it in his heart. He could be considered to be a wealthy man now, and he had made friends with many influential officials. He had never seen anything that couldn't be settled with money and power. As long as he had enough money and influence, nothing was a problem. Moreover, he had an unfathomable big brother behind him. He felt that his big brother had been cultivating for a long time and was out of touch with this era. However, he only dared to think this in his heart and didn't dare to say it out loud. Yu Qianqiu squinted and stared at him for a while. A fierce look flashed across his face. After some hesitation, he took out the token with the words, Yongzhen, engraved on it and handed it over. Yu Wuqiu's gloomy eyes immediately lit up. He knew that the thing his big brother gave him was definitely not something ordinary. He asked in excitement, Big brother, is this for me? Seeing his big brother nod, he quickly took it and carefully examined it. He then asked, Big brother, this is? The Imperial Court's Imperial Preceptor Yongzhen owes me a favor. I asked him for this token. If the Yu clan encounters any trouble in the future, you can use this token to seek his help. Yu Qianqiu warned again, remember, don't use this token unless you encounter a disaster that you can't resolve. It can only resolve 3 disasters for the Yu clan. After 3 times, the Imperial Preceptor Yongzhen will take it back. You must remember this. To a mortal like Yu Wuqiu, the reputation of the Imperial Preceptor Yongzhen in the Xia Empire was many times greater than his big brother's. In their eyes, the Imperial Preceptor Yongzhen was a true god. He was a person who stood above everyone else in the entire Xia Empire. With this token, he could resolve 3 troubles. This was no different from the 3 death exemption tokens given by the Imperial Preceptor Yongzhen. Yu Wuqiu held the token as if it was a priceless treasure. He said excitedly, I know. I know. I heard that the reason why the current emperor was able to conquer this world was because of the Imperial Preceptor Yongzhen's ability to cast beams to form soldiers. I've also heard from some merchants that the Imperial Preceptor Yongzhen doesn't easily interfere with the affairs of the Imperial Court. However, if he were to speak, he could even decide the next successor to the throne. Big brother, you have such a precious thing for me instead of keeping it for yourself. It can be seen that you still have our Yu clan in your heart. I was thinking too much just now. Little brother apologizes to big brother. As he spoke, he held the token and bowed deeply 3 times. Yu Qianqiu was speechless. He didn't expect that the crying Shi Xiaotian in front of him would have such a great reputation in the secular world. His Shi clan's world was actually obtained by Shi Xiaotian's casting beams to form soldiers. Then what did he spend so much effort for? However, it made sense. Given Shi Xiaotian's status in the Shi clan, he could really decide the successor to the throne. If Shi Xiaotian objected, it would be useless no matter who in the Shi clan objected. Looking at this little brother of his who smelled like a commoner, Yu Qianqiu sighed in his heart. He didn't say anything else. It was indeed not good for him to meddle too much in the affairs of the secular world. Otherwise, how could he convince the masses? However, he had transmigrated to this family, and it was thanks to this family that he was fated to embark on the path of cultivation. It was impossible for him to abandon the family and completely ignore it. Even animals knew how to repay kindness, so how could he be dismissive of it? He didn't want to meddle in the affairs of the secular world, but he had still clenched his teeth and created this token against his will. He hoped that it would protect the Yu clan for 3 generations. Today, he had ruthlessly crippled his eldest nephew's hand in order to teach the Yu clan a lesson they would never forget. If the Yu clan cherished their fortune, they would naturally avoid using the command medallion as much as possible. In that case, the medallion might not only protect 3 generations of the Yu clan, but also 5, 6, or even more than 10 generations. On the other hand, the 3 uses of the command medallion might not even be enough for a single generation. One could imagine just how bad the character of the Yu clan was. Chapter 1146. Although he was not a good person in both of his lives, behind his great evil was a bodhisattva's heart. Using violence to fight violence, using evil to fight evil was his method, but he had never used the slightest bit of violence against any good people, nor did he do anything to make things difficult for them. He knew very well that the people who suffered the most between the rise and fall of the country were the dull and ignorant citizens. Perhaps he still had a conscience and always wished to do something for them when he had the ability. However, the affairs of the world were unpredictable, and there were some things that he could not predict. He did not know what it would mean for the Yu clan if he gave this token to them. Today, he had ruthlessly crippled his nephew's hand because he had always been ruthless in dealing with the root of the problem. He did not have that much time to carefully teach his nephew, so he could only forcefully set things right. It was better to suffer for a while than to suffer for a lifetime. This had indeed taught Yu Wucho and his son a lesson. In the past 2 generations, they had not used this token even once. However, the Yu clan's business had grown bigger and bigger. As the saying goes, wealth does not last more than 3 years. This was not without reason. With the accumulation of wealth, the descendants did not know the difficulties their ancestors had to go through, did not know the impermanence and dangers of the world, and sat on the wealth they had left behind. What trouble could they not easily solve? Over time, how could their temperament and disposition be as normal as a normal person's? When their mentality became distorted, they would inevitably do some evil things for the sake of wealth. When it came to the 3rd generation under Yu Wucho, the expansion of wealth caused the 3rd generation to become somewhat unscrupulous. Finally, he got into trouble. In fact, he did not provoke any powerful figures. He had only taken a fancy to the beauty of a general's daughter. The 3rd generation did not care about her at all. Thinking that he had a good relationship with the general's superior, he directly raped the general's daughter. As a result, the general flew into a rage. The other party held military power, but he could not even protect his own daughter. How could the general endure this? As a result, he threw caution to the wind. He did not care whether the general was a superior or a superior. He brazenly gathered the troops under his command and carried out a bloodbath on the prosperous Yu clan. Almost everyone was killed, and the wealth that had been accumulated over several generations was snatched away. Fortunately, his old man had suffered a loss at the hands of Yu Qianqiu. Since then, he still had a lingering fear, so the family recruited many Jianghu experts. Coincidentally, at the time of this disaster, those Jianghu masters who had received his father's kindness desperately fought a bloody path out of the thousands of soldiers and horses for him, protecting him all the way to escape. As for his family and whatnot, he did not care about them. It could be said that he had received a great retribution. After that, the general did not let him go. He swore to kill him to avenge his daughter. He led the army to chase. Only when an even larger suppression army arrived did the general stop. Seeing that the entire Yu clan had been destroyed, the terrified Yu clan naturally wanted to take revenge. Thus, he sought help from the high officials he had a good relationship with. Those high officials readily agreed. Seeing that the entire Yu clan had been destroyed, the ordinary people did not dare to say anything. When they saw that someone was leading the army to take revenge, they immediately flocked to follow. Coupled with some people with ulterior motives, an explosion was inevitable. The imperial court was afraid that the world would be in chaos. In order to stabilize the morale of the army and the people, a mere Yu clan was nothing. Now that the Yu clan's wealth had been scattered, it was even less of a problem. Moreover, there were people who wanted to seize the Yu clan's properties. Naturally, they pushed him out to appease the world. The well-informed Yu clan panicked when he heard the news. At the critical moment, he remembered the token passed down by his ancestor. Thus, with the mentality of making a desperate attempt, he took the token and went to the entrance of the palace to seek an audience with the imperial preceptor Yongzhen. The moment the token was revealed, it became extremely powerful. The imperial preceptor Yongzhen, who had long since left the secular world, issued a decree to summon him. This shocked the entire palace. This was a character that even the emperor found difficult to meet. After seeing the Yu clan and hearing that his surname was Yu, the imperial preceptor Yongzhen immediately thought of Yu Qianqiu. He then asked about the background of his ancestor. After learning that the Yu clan's grandfather was Yu Wuqiu, he was even more certain that the Yu clan was related to Yu Qianqiu. He couldn't help but sigh in his heart. Boss gave the world to his Shi clan, but let his own clan sink into the common people. This magnanimity was something that he couldn't help but admire. After learning about the trouble he had caused, the imperial preceptor Yongzhen only frowned slightly. He immediately issued a decree to the current emperor to exterminate the rebel army and the people, restoring peace to the world. Since this all-powerful ancestor had spoken, the entire imperial court immediately quieted down. With the fastest speed and highest efficiency, the army was assembled. Within a few months, all the chaos was quelled. And the Yu clan's third generation profited from the disaster. No one expected that he actually had the backing of the world's #1 expert. As a result, no one dared to touch his properties, and they all returned to the Yu clan. The ones who suffered the most were the generals and the rebellious people. The first thing the Yu clan's third generation did after obtaining a new life was to cherish the memory of his ancestor. He wept bitterly in front of his ancestor's memorial tablet and thanked his ancestor for saving his life. The second thing he did was to work hard to reproduce and make up for the Yu clan's losses. At this point, the Yu clan's third generation finally knew how to restrain himself. Because everyone knew that the Yu clan had a relationship with the state preceptor Yongzhen, the rise of the Yu clan was inevitable. By the time the fourth generation of the Yu clan became the head of the Yu clan's power had already reached the pinnacle of both the political and commercial realms. The result of this was that the hearts of the people were not satisfied. By the fifth generation of the Yu clan had begun to covet the imperial power. However, they were still somewhat apprehensive about the state preceptor Yongzhen. When it came to the sixth generation, it was terrible. That fellow was extremely daring and actually deceived the sovereign step by step, testing the reaction of the state preceptor Yongzhen. After seeing that the state preceptor Yongzhen had no intention of interfering, he brazenly plotted to collude with the throne. In the end, it did not work out. The sad thing was that the success of the imperial preceptor was also due to the failure of the imperial preceptor. This was because all the armies in the world were also wary of the immortal-like imperial preceptor Yongzhen. When they saw that someone was plotting against the throne, all the grand marshals of the army who usually listened to him immediately turned their weapons against him, and all of them sent their troops to protect the emperor. The result was obvious. However, the command medallion was put to good use again, and Yongzhen personally appeared to protect the Yu clan. This made everyone puzzled. Could this Yu clan be the illegitimate child of imperial preceptor Yongzhen? Why was he helping his own clan when they rebelled? As a result, the monarch was no longer the sovereign, and the subjects were no longer the subjects. Everyone started to look down on the sovereign. Only the sixth generation of the imperial preceptor Yongzhen could do anything about it. He ran to the residence of the state preceptor Yongzhen and cried for a few days, saying that he was the state preceptor of the imperial preceptor Yongzhen and couldn't help him. As a result, the state preceptor Yongzhen became gloomy. How could the descendant of this boss endlessly torment him? In the end, the state preceptor Yongzhen made up his mind and summoned the sixth generation of the imperial preceptor Yongzhen. He asked him, "If you want to sit on the throne, then say that I promised your ancestor to help your Yu clan 3 times. If you want to sit on the throne, then I will help you 3 times and fulfill my promise." However, you will have to return the command medallion to me. This is the only price you have to pay. Think about it carefully and stop tormenting yourself endlessly. If you continue tormenting yourself, then the world will fall into chaos. As a result, the sixth generation of the Imperial Preceptor Yongjin bashfully expressed that he indeed had that intention. He was afraid that the State Preceptor Yongjin wouldn't agree and was too embarrassed to say it out loud. The State Preceptor Yongjin immediately felt a toothache. As expected of the descendant of the Imperial Preceptor Yongjin, his shamelessness was quite similar to that of the Imperial Preceptor Yongjin. As a result, he took back the command medallion and personally dealt with this matter. He called the emperor over and bluntly said, "The Shi clan's empire was actually gifted to us by the Yu clan's ancestor. My current achievements are also thanks to the Yu clan's ancestor. Now that their descendant wants us to repay this debt, we cannot refuse to pay it back. Otherwise, I won't be able to explain it to his ancestor. Prepare to abdicate, I will give you a good home." Just like that, the Yu clan finally fell into the hands of the sixth generation of the Imperial Preceptor Yu and successfully took control of the entire Huaxia Empire without bloodshed. The first thing the sixth generation of the Imperial Preceptor Yu did was the same as the third generation of the Imperial Preceptor Yu. However, he brought a group of descendants to kneel in front of the ancestral tablets and cried bitterly, thanking the ancestors for their great kindness. After going through all the ancestral tablets, one would realize that Yu Qianzhou's name was nowhere to be seen. There was nothing to do with Yu Qianzhou. Meanwhile, Imperial Preceptor Yongjin gathered all the descendants of the Shi clan together. There were tens of thousands of them and they were all brought to the Eastern Holy Land to start a new life there. After fulfilling the 3 promises, Imperial Preceptor Yongjin actually heaved a sigh of relief. All these years, he had been bound by the 3 promises on the command medallion. That was why he had been staying in that boring imperial palace, waiting for the person who brought the command medallion to find him. He was afraid that his departure would delay his boss's matters. After fulfilling the promise, Imperial Preceptor Yongjin floated away in the vast world. The descendants of the Shi clan also didn't know where he went. At this moment, Yu Qianzhou didn't know what would happen next. If he knew, he might not have given the command medallion away. Yu Wuchou, who was bowing to thank his big brother, suddenly heard a commotion. He raised his head and saw that his big brother was no longer there. Instead, he saw his wife barging in with a group of people. He couldn't help but feel furious. Right now, he was so regretful that his intestines were turning green. If it wasn't for the fact that he had gotten used to those beautiful sword-wielding beauties back in Utopia and had such a wonderful impression of them, he wouldn't have fallen in love with this woman at first sight. After tasting her, he realized that she was simply too shrewish. She would always bring weapons out to fight for her life. Just looking at her made his head hurt. Where is the person who attacked my son? Get him to come out. The shrewd woman who barged in with a sword roared angrily. With a wave of her hand, a group of servants who were also holding weapons started searching for the person in the old residence. Pa! Yu Wuchou walked over and gave her a slap. He pointed at his stunned wife and scolded, "Is that someone you can scold? If you keep making noise, I'll divorce you." He also looked around, afraid that his big brother would be in trouble if he heard what his wife said. Unexpectedly, his wife didn't appreciate his kindness. She stomped her feet and cried, "How dare you hit me? I'll fight you to the death." She raised her sword and chased after him, causing Yu Wuchou to run around. A group of servants quickly came over to stop the fight. At this moment, Yu Qianzhou had already arrived at the foot of the southern mountain outside the town. He landed in a large thicket behind a house that was obviously much more luxurious than the houses of the surrounding farmers. He swept his gaze across the surrounding fields and saw an old couple in coarse clothes returning from the fields. He couldn't help but freeze. The man had a hoe on his shoulder, and the woman had a bamboo basket on her waist that contained some fresh vegetables. The 2 of them chatted and laughed along the way, looking very healthy. They even helped each other cross the ditches in the fields from time to time. After seeing the old couple enter the house, Yu Qianzhou still didn't move. After listening to the conversation in the house, he couldn't help but smile. When the sound of pots and pans could be heard, and smoke began to billow out from the chimney, he felt that the matters of the secular world had been resolved with the billowing smoke. Yu Qinshuo's gaze suddenly looked towards the distant horizon, and gradually became fierce. He had already made up his mind. He wouldn't tolerate anyone disturbing this pure land of the mortal world, not even the supreme of the demon world, Demon King Three Knights. The leaves gently swayed, and the people in the thicket had already disappeared. Over the ditches that the old couple had crossed, there were now stone bridges that were very sturdy and exquisite. Chapter 1147. Those who attacked from the dark had more or less an advantage, and the methods they could choose were more than those who defended passively. After Jintai and Baichi ran around for a while, they had already grasped the general situation of the netherworld and celestial world. The two of them immediately took action. First, they joined hands to cause a ruckus in the celestial world, destroying several large sects and causing panic among the sects in the celestial world. Suddenly, they took the risk to attack the headquarters of the Passionless Palace, almost razing the entire headquarters to the ground. The enraged Wang Qing chased after them all the way, but he was actually lured into the underworld by the two of them. Wu Feng, who heard the news, immediately came to help. After a fierce battle, Jin Tai and Baichi pretended to be injured and fled. Wang Qing and his son saw the two of them were injured, and immediately became spirited. They chased them in the netherworld, looking like they wanted to take advantage of the two of them being injured to get rid of them. With the annihilation of the Purgatory Army and the retreat of the Red Armored Army, the Endless Horizon, the place that caused all living beings in the netherworld to tremble, had long since changed. There was only lava flowing everywhere. A few flowing lights flew past the Endless Horizon, and the enemies that were faintly discernible were about to escape into the mysterious forbidden area. Wu Feng, who was chasing them, laughed sharply and shouted angrily, "Jintai, Baichi! The mysterious forbidden area is in front, you have nowhere to run, today is the day you die." "The day we die?" Jintai's wild laughter came from afar. "Ignorant fools, I'll let you and your son be happy for a few days. There will be time for you to cry." Wang Qing, who was flying quickly behind Wu Feng, suddenly frowned and said, "Father, why do I feel that something is wrong? Why can't I see Baichi? That guy has always been known for his speed, naturally he ran faster than Jintai." Wu Feng's voice suddenly paused, and he stopped in the air. Amidst the rolling heat waves and the soaring red light, he shouted, "Not good. We've fallen into the trap of these two scoundrels." Wang Qing's expression changed. In the blink of an eye, he seemed to understand something and quickly turned back. The father and son looked at each other silently for a while, and their faces gradually turned pale. Without saying a word, they turned around and flew back almost without hesitation. "Haha." Jin Tai's arrogant laughter came from afar again. "It's too late for you to understand now." A streak of golden light was reflected back, and it chased after the father and son at an even faster speed. Golden light flashed from its body, and its disheveled golden robes were completely refurbished, and it didn't appear that it had been injured in the slightest. Suddenly, the sky above the underworld rumbled unceasingly, and the fierce sound of fighting constantly resounded between heaven and earth. Jin Tai relied on his faster speed to continuously chase after Wang Qing and his son. When the father and son attacked, he immediately turned around and fled. At this time, anyone could see that Jin Tai was stalling for time. On the way, Wu Feng finally received an urgent message from his sister, Lady Blackpool. She said that Baichi was on a killing spree at the exit between the underworld and the celestial world. No one could stop him. Now, no one dared to go near that area. She asked the father and son to quickly go and help. This confirmed the father and son's guess. Jin Tai and Baichi had pretended to be injured and set up a trap to lure the father and son. Then, Baichi would use his faster speed to quickly open the passage to the demon world, and Jin Tai would stall them to buy more time for Baichi. However, what the father and son could not understand was that since Baichi had already reached the exit between the two realms, why didn't he hurry to open the passage to the demon world? Why was he wasting time by killing people at the exit? With Baichi's cultivation, if the father and son were stalled here, who could stop Bai Qi from opening the passage to the demon world? Once he thought of this, he didn't have time to think about anything else. He used all his strength to defeat Queen Jean and immediately said anxiously, "Father, every passage to the demon world is blocked by many formations. Even if Bai Qi wants to open the passage to the demon world, he won't be able to do so in a short period of time. Your flying speed is faster than mine, so quickly chase after Bai Qi. There's still time. I will stall Jin Tai. Go quickly." "All right." Wu Feng shouted and quickly disappeared into the distance with the wind god's staff. Wang Qing turned around and chased after Jin Tai. "Trying to run? It won't be that easy." Jin Tai laughed evilly. He did not want to fight with Wang Qing at all. He quickly dodged Wang Qing and used his even faster speed to tangle with Wu Feng. His golden cloud rod shone brightly as it smashed towards Wu Feng. Wu Feng, who had to fight back, was so angry that he almost vomited blood. Time waits for no man. But he had no choice but to block. When Wang Qing caught up again, he shouted angrily, "You go. I'll stop him." Wang Qing's expression was serious as he flew past the two fighting. However, after fighting for a while, Jin Tai immediately avoided Wu Feng and chased after Wang Qing again. Just like this, the father and son were forced to fight with Jin Tai. They had to block as they rushed. However, Jin Tai's cultivation was too high and he couldn't do anything to him. Jin Tai wasted a lot of time. When the father and son finally arrived at the passage between the underworld and the celestial world, they found that a large area of the passage was blocked by fog. A group of people were trying their best to break the formation. The rumbling caused the ground to tremble continuously. However, how could the hundreds of formations that Bai Qi had personally set up be compared to the motley crew? The group of people only broke through a dozen formations after a whole day. Waha! Bai Qi, you're really something. You're giving them a taste of their own medicine. Looking at this, Jin Tai laughed wildly. Their plan was to make use of the time difference. That was why they deliberately lured Wang Qing and his son to a remote area of the underworld so that Bai Qi could rely on his speed to buy more time to open the passage to the demon world. However, what Jin Tai didn't expect was that Bai Qi would come up with a stroke of genius on the spot. He learned from the people of the immortal realm and netherworld and set up a large number of great arrays on the passageway between the two realms. In turn, he blocked the pursuit of Wang Qing and his son. Seeing this, the stone in Jin Tai's heart fell to the ground. If it was as he expected, Bai Qi should have also set up many formations on the side of the celestial world to stop them. This way, opening the passage to the demon world would not have any more twists and turns. It should be in the bag. How could he not be happy? Stop him. I'll break the formation. Wu Feng shouted angrily. Wang Qing turned around and charged at the arrogant Jin Tai. The latter immediately stood not too far away, clearly wanting to continue to delay one of the father and son, not letting them work together to break the formation. A huge staff flew into the night sky, like a meteor falling from the sky. It smashed into the depths of the white mist with a boom. The ground shook violently. The people who were originally surrounding this place to break the formation did not expect Wu Feng to attack without even giving them a warning. They were so scared that they scattered like birds and beasts to avoid being accidentally injured. No matter how powerful the defensive power of the formation that Bai Qi had set up was, it could not withstand a single strike from the divine wind staff. With a single strike, the formation was broken. The divine wind staff shot up into the sky again, turning into a speck of starlight that grew larger and larger before crashing down again. Rumble, rumble, rumble. Half a day later, the mist finally dispersed and the hundreds of formations were finally broken. Wang Qing. You guard the passage, don't let that traitor come and cause trouble. Wu Feng screamed and grabbed the wind god's staff, shooting into the spinning black light. However, what he didn't expect was that the moment he came out of the passage, he immediately saw the twisting power of the world spinning towards him. It was terrifyingly strong. Wu Feng was shocked and immediately understood that Bai Qi had laid down a killing formation to wait for him. In a moment of panic, he almost fell for it. Luckily, the treasure in his hand was the wind god's staff. With an angry shout, a ball of abominable black wind suddenly exploded, dispersing the huge killing force. The wind god's staff rapidly expanded, and with a boom, it directly pierced through the entire mountain, breaking apart the formation and the mountain. His figure flew out along the white light above his head and came out of the mountain. He saw the dense mist formation again, and there were still rumbling sounds outside. Clearly, there were also people breaking the formation outside. Wu Feng pointed towards the sky without hesitation. The enormous wind god's staff was like an enormous wind drill that spun rapidly and drilled into the white mist above his head. Rumble. Rumble. A series of explosions rang out. After another half a day, the fog dispersed, and another 100 or so formations were broken. Wu Feng flew into the air and grabbed the wind god's staff. Ignoring the dumbfounded crowd around him, he headed straight for the immortal world's devil world's tunnel. Bai Qi, who had killed his way here, had already reached the outskirts of the passage to the demon world 3 days earlier. At this time, the obsidian light mirror in his hand was exploding with uneven black light, clearing away the messy formations along the way. For more than a day, the obsidian light mirror had not stopped operating. In the distance, a large group of people were watching this scene in a daze. However, Bai Qi's cultivation base was too high for them. They were no match for him at all. Rushing forward would be suicide. Some of the people who had rushed forward regardless of the cost were directly turned into ashes by the obsidian nether light mirror in Bai Qi's hand. No one dared to move recklessly. They could only watch helplessly, not knowing what to do. Emperor of the Underworld. Quickly stop. Once the demon world is opened, you know better than us what the consequences will be. Someone shouted with tears of blood, as long as you are willing to give up on opening the passage to the demon world, we are willing to restore the original order of the celestial world and the netherworld, and worship you forever. Yes. Yes. Countless people shouted, Emperor of the Underworld. Quickly stop. Bai Qi's expression changed, as if he was moved. If he was not forced, he would not want to open the demon world again. However, he instantly calmed down, and his indifferent voice resounded through the sky. Wait until you can be the master of Wu Feng and Wang Qing, then say such words to me. Otherwise, it is no different from farting. Who can truly understand what I have done for the 3 realms for so many years? In the end, aren't you going against me just because you say so? Haha. I would rather betray the world than let the world betray me. Why not kill all the heartless people? His voice was filled with grief and anger. The black light suddenly soared, breaking the few magic formations with all its power. A huge mountain with a steel inlaid on it appeared in the mist. Under the illumination of the black light, the accumulated dust and vines on the steel were all swept away. Dense and strange magic symbols were engraved on the steel. Seal of the demon world. A wave of terrified exclamations came from the crowd in the distance. There were still many formations that had not been broken behind the large mountain and on both sides, but those were not important. At this time, Bai Qi could not hear the urgent shouts behind him, nor could he see the formations that had not been broken. In his eyes, there was only the metal steel, and the speed at which his chest rose and fell became somewhat hurried. Chapter 1148. In the hallucinatory immortal city, Yu Qianqiu, who was disguised as Niu Yud, casually walked to Nongzhu's stall. He picked up a horse sculpture and clicked his tongue. Oh my God! There was actually such a marvelous sculpture in this world. He wondered which extraordinary person had created it. Boss. How many spirit stones are you selling it for? He smiled wretchedly. Nongzhu looked at him as if he was a dead man. She sat there motionlessly and said, "It is rare to see a man like you. Why don't you tell me what's so good about the things in my stall? If you really know what's good about them, I will give them to you for free." His words seemed to be saying, praise me as much as you can. I want to see what you can boast about." Yu Qianqiu could see that this old handsome man had a problem with him. Forget it, he would not argue with him now. He would ask Jade Flower Fairy to deal with him when he returned. Just when he was about to say something to comfort him, there was a sudden commotion in the square. Looking back, he found that many disciples of the Heartless Palace had come to the square and were talking passionately. What's going on? Yu Qianshou held the horse sculpture in his arms and got back to business. However, he was transmitting his voice secretly. Nongzhu also understood that it was not the time to be angry. She explained angrily, after the Immortal Underworld and the Underworld established the Immortal Underworld Demon Slaying Alliance, the Heartless Palace established the Rogue Cultivators Alliance from all over the Immortal World. The gimmick was that they took out a quota of 1,000 true disciples of the Heartless Palace and prepared to reward them to the Rogue Cultivators who made great contributions to the Immortal Underworld Demon Slaying Alliance. It was said that the Rogue Cultivators who made great contributions could join the Heartless Palace and practice the sword-drawing movement of the Heartless Palace. Once this gimmick was taken out, the Rogue Cultivators in the Immortal World rushed to join. I heard that 2 to 3 million people have been gathered to compete for the 1,000 quota. The Rogue Cultivators Alliance? Yu Qianshou was startled. He was quite familiar with this name. He had once been the leader of the Rogue Cultivator Alliance in the cultivation world, so he didn't find it strange that these rogue cultivators would flock to him like a flock of ducks. He nodded slightly and said, "Independent cultivators do not have a good life. Being able to join the Heartless Palace and obtain the true legacy of the Heartless Palace's sword-drawing technique is indeed a chance to change one's fate. If it were me, I would take the gamble. Anyway, no one knows you now. You can give it a try." Nongzhu said sarcastically. Yu Qianshou caressed the horse sculpture in his arms and chuckled, "Forget it. If the people from the Heartless Palace know it's me, don't fight me to the death." "Oh." Nongzhu made a long, "oh" sound and said, "I forgot to tell you something. Wang Qing has publicly announced that the grudge between you and the Heartless Palace has been written off." He told Nongzhu about how Yu Qianshou called the police in time and resolved the crisis. Then, Wang Qing told him about how he took credit for the incident and what he heard recently. "Ah. Is there such a good thing?" Yu Qianshou was stunned. He looked around and said, "That's what I said. Looking at the situation in the hallucination Immortal City, I know that Jin Tai and Bai Qi have not succeeded. Otherwise, the hallucination Immortal City would not be so lively when the diabolism came. That's why I said you can give it a try. It's not bad to get the sword-drawing technique of the Heartless Palace." Nongzhu teased. "Come on. How could the Heartless Palace divulge the cultivation method of the sword-drawing technique so easily? At most, they only divulged the first technique. But now, I can buy some things in the hallucination Immortal City and exchange all the things that those people in the human world have." "You really brought all the cultivators in the human world here?" Nongzhu was stunned. Yu Qianshou replied with an "N." He put down the horse sculpture in his hand and walked into the crowd. He started to buy all the cheap things in the stalls. After all, no matter how cheap they were still better than the ordinary things in the human world. The key was that it was not practical to buy a lot of high-grade things. Moreover, millions of people were using high-grade things and he did not have the financial resources to do so. He could only make do with what he had. After he bought thousands of low-grade flying swords in the stalls, he immediately attracted the attention of the Mythical Fire Palace's disciples. They followed behind him. When they saw that he had nothing to buy, a red-robed disciple squeezed to his side and cupped his hands. "I'm a disciple of the Mythical Fire Palace." Yu Qianshou turned and looked at him. He frowned and said, "What's the matter? It seems that you want to buy a lot of all kinds of low-grade immortal equipment. My Mythical Fire Palace is the #1 blacksmith sect in the 3 realms." The red-robed disciple smiled and said, "If you want to buy a lot, my Mythical Fire Palace has a lot of stock. If you buy a lot, it will be cheaper. It will save you time and effort compared to you buying here and there. What do you think?" It seemed like he was a disciple of the Mythical Fire Palace who was trying to attract business. Yu Qianshou frowned. How could he have forgotten about the Mythical Fire Palace? This daddy's grudge with the heartless palace had already been written off. He could totally go to the mythical fire palace to buy things openly. Why was there a need to waste time here? Good, good, good. It's good that it's cheaper. Yu Qianqiu nodded and smiled. The red-robed disciple immediately stretched out his hand and invited, "Sir, please follow me." The two of them flew out of the crowd. Not long later, they landed at the entrance of the mythical fire palace's branch. Actually, Yu Qianqiu was very familiar with this place. He had been here many times. However, in the past, he would usually directly enter the back hall to look for Elder Huolianqing. However, this red-robed disciple led him to a small room at the side and invited him to sit down and have some tea. After he left and returned, he respectfully brought an old man with him. The old man clearly didn't think that this little disciple could attract any big customers. He walked in with his hands behind his back. When he realized that he couldn't see through Yu Qianqiu's cultivation, his expression became more serious. He cupped his hands and sat opposite of Yu Qianqiu. He asked, "I'm Li Zhen. How should I address you?" "Niu Yud." Yu Qianqiu held the teacup and replied. Li Zhen frowned and thought about it. He realized that he had never heard of this person before. However, he didn't mind it. He laughed and said, "I heard from the disciple that you want to buy all kinds of low-tier immortal equipment in bulk. I wonder what kind of low-tier immortal equipment you want and how many do you want?" Yu Qianqiu sat there and drank a mouthful of tea. He then smiled faintly and said, "I want flying swords. I don't want all low-tier ones. I want high-tier ones too. However, I heard from him that it would be cheaper to buy them in bulk. Don't cheat me." He pointed at the little disciple who was standing with his hands behind his back. "There's naturally a discount if you buy in bulk." "He's right," Li Zhen said with a face full of smiles. "Can you give me a specific number?" Yu Qianqiu put down the teacup and said solemnly, "I want as much as you have." "You must be joking." Li Zhen laughed. He used his laughter to reevaluate Yu Qianqiu. He was wondering if Yu Qianqiu really had the financial resources to buy as much as he had. One had to know that mythical fire palace had been in the immortal realm for so many years. There were countless low-tier flying swords that their disciples had refined. Just this branch alone had a backlog of millions of them. If they could really sell them all, it would really be a big business. However, who would want so much trash if they had the financial resources? "Do I look like I'm joking?" Yu Qianqiu asked coldly. "Haha. Of course it's better if it's true." Li Zhen twirled his white beard as he chuckled. "There are 9 grades of immortal artifacts. Grade 1 is 1 divine grade spirit stone, Grade 2 is 100, Grade 3 is 10,000, Grade 4 is 1 million, and Grade 5 is 100 million. These are the market prices. If Honored Sir wants to buy in bulk, the price can be negotiated. As for Grade 6 and above, any one of them would easily cost tens of billions of divine grade spirit stones. Most of them are custom-made, and the price is not something I can decide. Our branch does have a few in stock. If Honored Sire is really sincere in purchasing in large quantities, I can introduce you to the elder in charge of the branch." The price was the market price. Yu Qianqiu's eyes rolled as he pondered, then he asked again, "Report me the stock, I'll buy according to the amount of money I have." He's for real this time. Li Zhen's spirit rose, straightening his back as he said, "There are about 2 million Grade 1 immortal artifacts in the branch, 400,000 Grade 2 immortal artifacts, 200,000 Grade 3 immortal artifacts, close to 10,000 Grade 4 immortal artifacts, 7 to 800 Grade 5 immortal artifacts, and 11 Grade 6 immortal artifacts. May I know which grade Honored Sir is looking for, and how many do you need?" Yu Qianqiu nodded thoughtfully at Li Zhen's words. Estimating, just 11 Grade 6 immortal artifacts would cost more than 100 billion divine grade spirit stones, and buying all the grades would cost at least 200 billion divine grade spirit stones. The total amount of spirit stones he had now was less than 80 billion, and he still needed to keep some spirit stones in reserve, yet he wanted to buy all the high-grade immortal artifacts. Truly, even the cleverest housewife couldn't cook a meal without rice. After pondering for a while, Yu Qianzhou's mouth twitched. I only want 1,000,000 grade 1 immortal artifacts. Give me as many flying swords as possible. As for the rest, I want all the grade 2, 3, 4, 5, and grade 6 immortal artifacts. The two people in front of him exchanged a glance. Li Jin coughed lightly. He didn't expect it to be such a large sum. His previous estimate was 100,000, so he forced a smile. Honored Sir is aware that just these items alone would cost more than 200 billion divine grade spirit stones. Of course, I'm not doubting Honored Sir's wealth, but may I ask, what are you planning to do with such a large sum? Otherwise, you should know that if a large amount of things were to flow to the netherworld, it would be the same as cutting off other sects' source of income, and it would be hard for my mythical fire palace to explain to the other sections. He really couldn't figure out who else in the immortal world would want so many immortal artifacts at once. All the sects had an agreement. The mythical fire palace couldn't monopolize the netherworld's business just because of their reputation in artifact forging. This amount was a little too large. Most importantly, he was worried about this Niu Yud's wealth. You don't need to care about this, forget it. Those 2,000,000 plus grade 1 immortal artifacts, I want all of them. Yu Qianzhou thought that it was better to be prepared. Since he was going to do something immoral, he couldn't care less about those 1,000,000 plus grade 1 immortal artifacts. Thus, he decisively made his decision. His hand reached into his clothes and pulled out a bunch of storage bracelets. The two people in front of him were stunned. They couldn't imagine how Huang Xiaolong had so many storage bracelets on him. Why didn't they notice it earlier? Pa! Yu Qianzhou casually pulled out a storage bracelet, slapping it on the table, his voice resonant. Enough nonsense, I'm here to buy things, you're here to sell things. This is 10 billion divine grade spirit stones as a deposit, to show my sincerity. If you really want to do this business, take the deposit, and the goods will be delivered at the same time. Don't waste my time with useless words. If you can't do it, let someone in charge make the final decision. You're tuning into the Journey of the Soul YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.